A last will and testament delivers the final wishes and judgments of a loved one. But only a third of the population have made a will. And even if one exists, disputes can result in a legacy of trauma for those left behind. Often a home is the largest asset in an estate. The financial and emotional value of a property can lead to costly legal battles. Rose Blackall is battling to keep her home of 80 years.
We really belong to Marino. Marino is us.
5 years after her death, Ilse McKee's house stands empty, while her stepson waits for a decision on his inheritance.
We can't put an end to it. It's almost as though we can't bury her, you know.
And Madeleine Balch has to sell her family home to pay off an unexpected claimant on her late husband's estate. Madeleine married David Balch in 1965. He worked in the travel industry, eventually ending up with his own business, while Madeleine was kept busy at home bringing up their 3 children. They had been married for 29 years when David decided to set up in Moscow. His working abroad had a dramatic effect on Madeleine and the family.
I just sensed that there was something wrong. On his next visit home, I confronted him and asked him, and he said there was somebody else.
I know my dad's not the type of man to be by himself, but I didn't ever believe that he would go off and have an affair and leave my mum and my sister and obviously the rest of the family. It was a big shock.
He said he'd met this 27-year-old girl and he was in love with her. And then it was possibly a few months later or so that he said he wanted a divorce.
Over the years, David's various travel businesses had failed. He was a sociable optimist and went to Moscow ready to seize the opportunities for success. Camilla Gasanova worked in David's travel business. Their relationship developed slowly, but after 6 months, she moved in with him.
It was always interesting being with David. To me, he was like a father, friend, husband, and lover, all that in one person. Over time, I realized that it was actually a big plus, the age difference. The way he respected me, no one else had ever treated me like that.
I said to him, how can you say a divorce so quickly? You know, you don't know the girl, hardly been with her. But he was a different chap. He just wasn't the same.
David and Madeleine's only significant asset was their home in Baldock, Hertfordshire, and this became crucial in the divorce negotiations. They eventually agreed to sell the house, but nothing was finalized and nothing was signed. In February 1996, David returned to England to visit his family. While visiting Samantha and her daughter, he reached an important decision.
He sent me a fax saying he wasn't coming back, and I was really upset. His moods had been changeable for quite a while, and it was to do with the business.
But Camilla had even more shocking news for David.
When I went to the doctor, I found out I was pregnant. And that was another shock. I thought, what am I going to do? David phoned me when he found out about the pregnancy. He was very happy and said that under no circumstances should I have an abortion. I'm coming back, and we will sort out everything there.
David returned to Moscow, where he and Camilla prepared for the new baby. However, David's business was in difficulties, and in September 1996, when Camilla was 7 months pregnant, he went to England to find a new investor to rescue the business, and also to move the divorce forward.
There was nothing more that he could have done at that stage to move things faster. During the previous couple of months, he could have done things more quickly, and the problem we had was that he had a lot of outstanding legal costs due, and we were waiting for money to pay those costs.
Soon after David found out about the baby, he also consulted his solicitors about changing his will. If anything happened to him before the divorce had been finalised, he intended his estate to be divided equally between Madeleine and Camilla. Despite these developments, old family friends Alan and Valerie Zimmerman still held out hope for Madeleine and David getting back together.
I felt that if Madeleine had said, please come back, he would have come back. But then I don't know how strong the pull of Camilla was on the baby. He said he wouldn't sign the new will because he again was hoping Madeleine would have him back. David certainly didn't sign the divorce papers when he was over here, when I think if he'd wanted a divorce he probably would have signed them when he was here. So he was really totally confused. He didn't really know what he wanted to do.
When I last saw my dad, he was not a happy man. He was very upset. Things weren't going the way he wanted them to go when he was out in Russia. He sort of didn't have the money to buy the things that he wanted for the baby in Russia. He actually was crying. He cried with me. He wasn't happy at all. Very sad.
On David's last visit to England, I didn't see him at all. I did speak to him just before he flew out, and he seemed a wee bit down, and we exchanged pleasantries. And I remember when I put the phone down, I remember saying, mind how you go, take care, and look after yourself. And he said he would, and that was the last time I spoke to him.
David returned to Moscow. He told his daughter about Camilla's pregnancy, but not his wife, and he hadn't solved his business problems.
David came back from England with bad news, and we were both disappointed, because I was already 8 months pregnant. We needed to survive. We didn't have any money. He always tried to cheer me up, said everything will work out, don't worry.
Blue for a boy, you know.
Why? Him being a girl?
No, we just say, my country, pink for a little girl, blue for a boy. It's nice. Are they all different?
Despite being told he was in the best of health after a checkup in England, David started complaining of feeling unwell.
He was in bed, and I was on the phone with a friend. Suddenly, I heard a terrible noise, and I went to him, but he was in a very strange position. His head was over to one side. I called to him, David, what's the matter with you? But he didn't answer. He'd died instantly.
David's new will was drawn up, but he never signed it.
I had to tell my mum about the pregnancy on the day that we found out my dad had died, because inevitably it was going to come out, the fact that she was pregnant. It wasn't an easy thing to do at all.
In 1980, Madeleine and David had made mirror wills, each leaving everything to the other, and she assumed that settling his estate would be a straightforward matter.
You know, I just assumed that everything would be left to me here. I would keep my home, so I didn't worry really, and thought everything would be reasonably okay.
On the 5th of November 1996, 3 weeks after David's fatal heart attack, Camilla gave birth to a baby boy, David Charles.
We got a telephone call from Camilla in Russia and a fax from her in absolute desperate plea for help. She was left in a situation where her only source of income, Mr. Bolsh, had died very suddenly. She had also been employed by him in his business, and his business also disappeared, and she desperately wanted to know if there was anything that she could get for her child from his father's estate.
Единственное, что мы купили, это была мебель.
The only thing we bought was sofas while we were together, and I had to sell them just to get some money to live on.
A minor child of any age, under 18, but certainly a newborn baby, has the right to be provided for from the father's estate. The baby's case was funded by the Legal Aid Board, and legal aid was granted because the assets were in the United Kingdom, and the only way that he could get any support from his father's estate was to bring proceedings in the United Kingdom.
At the time of David's death, the family home was worth £117,000, but there were loans of £22,000 secured against it. The lawyers based their figures on the needs of all David's dependents, Madeleine, her daughter Gemma, and baby David.
They started off asking for 37,000, which I couldn't find without selling my home. And I have to bring up a child. And they were just taking everything from me that we had worked for years. I was just speechless. It would not have left me much money to find accommodation for Gemma and myself and to bring her up anyway. I had to see if something could be done about it.
Madeleine was so convinced that she shouldn't be paying out money for this child that it never entered her head that she would win or lose. It just didn't think about it.
She was a wronged woman, and she needed to fight that situation. Very difficult when you're on your own as well. So.
And why should she pay for her husband's indiscretion, basically?
Yes.
While the legal negotiations dragged on, Camilla was finding it difficult to cope on her own. She managed to find work, but couldn't afford to pay for childcare in Moscow. To keep earning, she had to send her 4-month-old son over 500 miles away to her native Republic of Dagestan, where she could afford to pay a nanny.
Я с сыном не виделась только...
I hardly saw my son. I only saw him twice a year for 2 weeks, when the nanny brought him to see me. And we spent time together, if you can call it that, for 2 weeks.
I felt before I handed any money over, I would like proof that it was David's baby, especially as David was backwards and forwards so often. So we went through the stages of getting DNA tests.
It was a year after the child's birth, and 6 months after proceedings had been issued, that Mrs. Bolsh made an application to court saying that she disputed paternity. I was extremely disappointed when we received that application, because I knew that it would increase the legal costs quite considerably. I knew also that it would delay the proceedings by several months.
It came back that it was possibly David's baby, but without 100% proof, because David had died and there was nothing that they could get from him.
Camilla did not tell her family about her son, as they would not have approved of her being an unmarried mother. After 2 years, she eventually shared her secret with a cousin living in Moscow, who agreed to look after the baby, so she brought him back from Dagestan to live with her in her one-roomed apartment.
It was 2 years after the baby had been born that Mrs. Bolsh first put forward any offer at all in negotiations. And that offer, which was for £20,000 including costs, at a time when the costs were £13,000 or £14,000 on the baby's side, meant that he would have ended up with about £6,000 or £7,000 from a father's estate of £100,000 to £110,000.
Очень длился долго, я не думала, что он...
It went on for such a long time. I never knew it would go on for so long.
Дело кончится хорошо.
And my lawyer was convinced that everything would work out well. She often said that, but I had already lost hope and thought it was useless, a waste of time.
Once David Jr.'s paternity was confirmed, a settlement was eventually negotiated before the case went to court.
After battling for about 3 years, eventually got the money down to 15,000 for the baby, which I thought was reasonable. I was told that if I battled any more and it went to court, I would lose everything.
It's been calculated that once baby David's £15,000 settlement has been paid and the legal aid bills for both sides repaid, it will total £45,000.
If I had have settled in the beginning for 37,000, I would have had to have sold up straight away, because there's no way I could have found 37,000. So I had to fight what I thought was right, that this child wasn't entitled to 37,000. I had to fight. Right. I'd like to look at some properties around sort of 114 or 15 mark. The only way for me to get the rest of the money to pay this debt off is for me to sell. I was hoping for a 3-bedroom if possible, as I'm moving from a 4-bedroom and, you know, reasonably spacious. I cannot raise any more at my age, so I'm having to sell my house to pay the rest of the money off. Gemma and I get by. I get a pension and I work as a care assistant, but once all this is taken from me, it will be a complete struggle, and I just wonder how Gemma and I are going to exist. Right, Nan, how are you doing with yours, darling?
Down the corridor.
Are you drinking? Drink a bit more for me.
She has not done anything wrong, but the way that it's escalated for Madeleine is totally unfair, and the fact that she's seen, you know, the British system helping somebody abroad and yet not giving her so much help must seem terribly unjust to her.
When Georgina was in the trolley, Georgina was funny about they were laughing.
What are you having on this? Second hand?
Конечно, я довольна.
Of course I'm happy, even with the final amount not I, but my son received. Always offered, put it that way. Of course I would have liked more. I know that if David were alive, or if had signed his will, I would have got more. Now I have a boyfriend. He helps me. He rents this flat. I'm working at the moment, but it's very difficult to find work. It's a big problem in Moscow.
I don't often go to his grave. It's his birthday next week, and I'm toying with the idea now whether to go or not. I'm angry, very angry with the way things have been left since his death. I know he didn't choose to die, I know that, but I'm just angry because of all the upset he's put everyone through. But he was my dad, and I'll always love him.
The worst thing about dealing with inheritance cases is that the one person whose opinion would be relevant and the one person who can make all the evidence fit together has died. The point that this case makes very clearly is that in the very emotional situation after somebody's death, it is extremely difficult for the remaining members of the family to divide up what's left unless there is a will which clarifies it.
I think all this has marred our memories, really. And we've got a lot of memories over the years, loads.
Only after the sale of her home will Madeleine be able to fully pay the £45,000 from David's estate.
I feel I should have been entitled to more after supporting my husband all those years and for us working together all those years.
Gold bag.
For somebody that comes along in just a very short relationship to just come in and tip everything upside down, I think is so wrong.
И это большая просто мечта.
It's a real dream of mine that my son has contact with his relatives. It's not just my dream, it's what David wanted.
David never signed his will, but the witnessing of a will is just as important as a signature. Les McKee discovered this to his cost when his witnesses were challenged by the probate office. In a quiet suburban estate in Alsager, Cheshire, Ilse McKee's house stands empty. She died in 1995, but Ilse's will was declared invalid, and her estate of £55,000 is frozen. Her stepson Les McKee awaits a resolution.
The house is in limbo, really. I'm paying expenses and so on, but I'm not legally the owner. So I suppose it's waiting for a decision whether it goes to the Crown or to me.
Les's widowed father met Ilse while serving in Germany. They married in 1948, and Les soon came to treat her as his mother.
I always thought of her as my mother, because after all I was only 13 when I met her, and 14 when they married. And I know my wife later and my children all regarded her as being my mother.
I always called her Mum, as Les did. And the children had always Nana. But no, we all got on very well together.
When Les's father died in 1976, his estate passed to his wife Ilse. She acted as a loving mother and grandmother to Les and his family. In 1995, she was taken into the local hospital suffering from emphysema, and her thoughts turned to her will.
She didn't want a solicitor then, and she said, oh no, you do it, you know what your father wanted, which of course I'm the only child, so it was really, the estate was left to me.
We went to visit mother-in-law with my daughter, and I told her that Les had made her will out for her. I'd got my mother-in-law to sign, and then 2 more visitors came, which was their next-door neighbour and her daughter-in-law. And I told the daughter-in-law that Mother had just signed her will. I said, but the nurse wouldn't witness it. And she said, well, I'll witness it. And her mother-in-law said, you know, I don't know. She was a bit frightened. She said, I'll just get my husband to sign it. I'll just take it home with me and get him to sign it.
I was there when the will was actually signed by my nana. She'd always said that she wanted everything to go to my dad if anything happened.
After she died, the will went for probate, and the solicitor got a request for the witnesses to sign an affidavit, just confirm the witnesses. They're more likely to seek that confirmation in the case of homemade wills. I suppose that's understandable.
The probate office ensures that every will presented is valid, that it's been properly drawn up, and that the witnesses were present when the will was signed.
Whenever we get an application, every will is checked, and it's checked, so far as we're concerned, in the same way to see whether it's valid or not, either by English law or by some other relevant system of law, but every will is checked. Under English law, if somebody is domiciled in England and Wales, to be valid, generally speaking, a will has to be signed either by the person who's making it or in his presence and at his direction. And that signature has to take place in the presence of 2 witnesses who then sign in the presence of the person who's made it. If there's something missing, it's called the attestation clause, which is a statement by the witnesses that everything was done properly, then we will ask the witness to describe what happened. And from that evidence, we can say, yes, the will is valid, or no, it isn't.
And at that stage, the witnesses admitted that they weren't actually there when the signature was made.
And therefore the will was invalid. So it was then referred to the Treasury Solicitor's Office, who's nominated by the Crown to look after the estates of people who have died intestate without a valid will, or who do not have any blood relatives.
We take blood relatives as meaning people who can trace a direct line from the deceased grandparents' relationship. Now, that does not include second cousins, it doesn't include relatives by marriage, and it doesn't include stepchildren.
As Les is Ilse's stepson, his relationship with his mother is not legally recognised. The Treasury solicitor advertised to find Ilse's beneficiaries, her next of kin. While the case dragged on, Les tried to maintain the house, even though he was not, and may never be, the legal owner.
The drive was completely overgrown, so we dug the side out and filled it with the stones to make it neat. Really, for the benefit of the neighbours, because the house had got in such a poor state. The things we haven't been able to do, of course, is to do anything about the the woodwork. The windows are all rotten. Guttering needs replacing. We did have a complaint about the garage door, which was completely rusty. My daughter has done the gardening, at least cut the grass and put a few plants in so that it looks a bit more respectable. It's just unfortunate that in the 5 years my health has deteriorated, so I haven't been able to do things myself. So it's meant really paying to have it done, which in turn has been something of a financial burden. But luckily, with my daughter being able to help, we've now got it in a reasonable state, I think.
There had been complaints from the surrounding houses, the very proud people. Hopefully our garden looks a little bit like theirs now, but you know, it's a nice area, and it did look terribly shabby and untidy. So it's a case of just trying to keep it neat and tidy now. My granddad worked all his life, and his estate went to my nana, and I feel very bitter that my father, being the only son, is having to fight for what his father actually worked for him. So it is a very bitter situation, really, very unfair.
It does seem tragic that it's so indefinite. We don't know. After 5 years, we don't know where it's going to go on for another 5 years even. In the meantime, the house deteriorates. Our solicitor says that there are 3 possible outcomes. One is that the whole estate goes to the Crown. Secondly, that the estate comes to me, which was the intention originally. And thirdly, that I would just get my expenses. But we really don't know. There's no indication of which choice they'll go for.
There's also the possibility that the Treasury solicitor will consider making a payment from the estate to Les McKee, with the balance going to the Crown.
Ex gratia payments are considered on a case-by-case basis, depending on the size of the estate, depending on what grounds the person has when they come to us and say that they should be a part or they should get a part of the deceased estate.
It's 5 years since Les lost his stepmother, and no progress has been made in settling her estate.
It doesn't seem right that someone we regarded as my mother, because legally she wasn't, and she was my stepmother, we can't put an end to it. It's almost as though we can't bury her, you know. It's very unsatisfactory.
And how long does it take for you to resolve most cases?
That's a difficult question. It's difficult because each will is taken on an individual basis, and so there's no average time.
The situation is a mystery to me. I really can't understand why it takes so long.
Once we have the money and we have sorted out the money, any that is left over goes to the Treasury, back to the Treasury, Her Majesty's Treasury.
If the estate goes to the Crown, I will feel very disappointed, not just because I haven't got it, but because it was a clear wish of my father and my mother that the estate should come to me. And they both made that quite clear in the past. I think that they would be very, very bitter.
The last communication that Les McKee had was that an estate agent was going to value the house. And it's the value of a property in Ireland that's the focus of a bitter feud amongst a Dublin family. Recently, a dispute in the Blackall family over their mother's will and the fate of the family home, Marino Park in Dublin, exploded in Irish newspapers. Just before she died, Helena Blackall, aged 99, made a will, dividing her estate equally among her children. Her daughters Rose and Eileen have lived in Marino Park since 1917. Rose is now 82.
I was born in Mrs. Ford's nursing home, and I was brought home 3 weeks later to Marino Park. My memories of Marino Park, a very happy home where you will come and go and always know that you were welcome.
Rose and Eileen's brother Gerard had not lived in Marino Park for over 50 years, but in 1991 he got into financial difficulties and took steps to claim his share of the estate, 14 years after his mother's death.
My mother was perfectly aware of the fact that my brother had no love for Marino Park. We never expected him to take an action against us. And furthermore, because of the length of time which we had lived at Marino Park, we did not think anyone could upset us. At the beginning we thought it was quite funny, but I'm afraid we learned that it wasn't.
The only way to pay their brother Gerard his share was to sell Marino Park. But Rose and Eileen fought this, firstly by challenging their mother's will, and then by battling every subsequent legal decision. While Eileen is too ill to get out, Rose still represents herself in court.
Whatever anyone may say, I do want what is mine, and I refuse to see why someone else should have what is mine. It's very annoying.
The image of this frail elderly lady displaying such spirit in her legal battles has attracted much public attention and support. The same cannot be said for Gerard's second wife, Iris, who was to become an unpopular participant in the dispute.
Well, I didn't meet Iris until 1984, when my brother married her. But if my brother wanted to marry her, I had nothing against it.
And for Gerard's son, William, Iris was not the ideal stepmother.
I did not approve of the marriage at all. I mean, I would have liked my father to have married, but a woman of his age and social background. She didn't really fit into our life here in Dublin.
I met him at a cricket match, and we just got on from there, and he wanted a companionship with me.
And it was quite an age difference, wasn't there, between...
Yes, between my husband and myself, yes. You know, it's a companionship. But then it's went into something else.
In the early years with Gerard, Iris and her young son from her first marriage got on quite well with her sisters-in-law.
I used to come up here for 14 years. It's only when Gerard started the court case, things went nasty.
To complicate family matters further, Gerard also had a stormy relationship with his own son, William.
In about June of 1994, he sent word to me through the hospital that he was dying, at least he was very ill with cancer. And I immediately contacted my stepmother, Iris Blackwell. She wasn't very keen on me going to see him, but I went on nonetheless, and then, as I say, I saw him every day. After that, we had a very deep, like we would row tremendously and shout at each other. But underlying it all, there was a sort of a deep emotional pull.
Even on his deathbed, Gerard was haunted by the Merino Park dispute.
The nurses in the hospice said to me, he's waiting on something happening. And I had to say, well, I had to get some people up and say that the whole thing was over, the court case. Just to let him rest in peace at that time. And then he died.
He said, don't worry, he said, you know, everything has been left between yourself and Iris. And that's the only time, and then we changed the subject. But I never asked him once, was I in the will? So it came as an awful shock to discover that he had cut me out of his will. I went into a field and I called him a bastard at the top of my voice. It was the greatest shock. I think I could safely say it was the greatest shock in my life. I couldn't understand. I mean, if I had children and we didn't get on, I still couldn't envisage doing something like that. It sort of like negates a whole relationship going back to the time you were born. I'm contesting my father's will under the Succession Act on the grounds that he had a moral obligation to provide for me.
All Gerard had to leave was his share of Merino Park.
Iris is, I mean, I'm 62. I don't know what age she is. She was 35 when she married my father, so she's in her late 40s, I suppose. But I say she's entitled in law to a third, and then the remaining 2/3 is at the discretion of the court.
I'm not going to give him anything. There's no way he's getting anything from his father's estate.
Before Iris and William can resolve their differences, the ongoing case between Iris and her sisters-in-law has to be settled first. In 1995, the courts decided that Merino Park must be sold, but the sisters refused to accept that ruling.
That's why we're in court so long. They appeal this and they appeal that. They appeal everything.
Despite the sisters' resistance, the courts accepted an offer of £400,000 from a developer. In 1998, in an effort to conclude the sale, the courts issued an ejection order.
Today, the sheriff's bailiffs arrived to enforce a court order for possession so that sale can proceed.
They told me that they had come to take possession of the house. I asked them, my sister had an appointment in the forecourts, and I asked them to wait until her return. They said they couldn't do that the matter had gone on too long.
I was told to just come here. Then the sheriff handed me the keys for the property. And then he told me to change the locks on the doors because they weren't allowed to come back in at that time. And I was coming in to look after the property.
Iris and her son were living in rented property, so the courts installed them in Merino Park as caretakers.
felt terrible about it. I wasn't happy. I thought it was really awful, the way they did things. And my son had to go down and lock the gate. It was on television.
The public support for the evicted elderly sisters was overwhelming. And the press cast media-shy Iris in the role of villainess, raking up her past to endorse their view. Now the evicted sisters are disputing the contract of sale for £400,000, accepted by the court in 1995. They claim that the contract is invalid because the full deposit was never paid. Blackrock is one of the most sought-after areas of Dublin. Properties in the area are now fetching premium prices, and Marino Park is a prime location for new development. Since their eviction, Rose and Eileen have received an offer from a new developer of almost £2 million, with the added bonus of the right to live there for the rest of their lives.
This has been going on for 9 years, but now they're going on about this 2 million or whatever it is. My husband made a deal with someone, and if I go back, then I'd be in contempt of court, and I can't do that.
Before this new offer can be considered, the court order for the £400,000 sale must be legally overturned. Whatever the outcome, Marino Park is deteriorating rapidly. Despite the encroaching wilderness and general decay, Rose and her sister Eileen are determined to move back to their beloved home.
There is a tiny section of the roof which would have to be done immediately. And that happened because a plane going across one morning, apparently something fell from it. I heard the crash, but I didn't do anything about it. And then I let things slide. But to do Marina up, perhaps if you wanted to reconstruct everything, it might cost you a fortune. If you wanted a comfortable living house, wouldn't cost all that much. Structurally, there is nothing wrong with Marino Park. It's absolutely sound.
The house has gone derelict, and that is it. And they did nothing about it. And rain pours in through the room, pours down through the stairs, through the other rooms. That's why my son and myself are living on top of the house, because we can't live downstairs. At the end of the day, it's not a very nice place to live. Everywhere is damp. To light a coal fire, right, is 13 hours in this fireplace for hot water. We have to go to friends for a bath. And I don't know how the two old ladies lived in here.
Oh, my aunts feel they can move mountains. I personally, if I was their age, I couldn't see myself living there. But they've got a determination if it was possible, they would move heaven and earth to go back.
The court upheld Rose and Eileen's claim that because of the developer's failure to pay the full deposit on the £400,000 contract, that sale was void. Today, it's back to court again, as the developer is appealing the decision. Rose is ready for battle.
I'm not nervous. See, I believe nerves are only for those who can afford them. And at the moment, I can't afford nerves.
Please God, something will be sorted out. Because my aunt, Rose now in particular, she was 82 last month. And the strain on her is really quite terrible. I mean, she's never, actually in all the years that I've known, they've never admitted to strain, stiff upper lip type of thing. But Rose lately, she just said to me the other day, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'll maybe have to go in a stretcher.
I just wish the whole thing was F-I-N-I-S-H-E-D and Deo Gracias at the end of that. And that would be my little prayer.
Much to Rose's disappointment, the appeal has been postponed. A cousin, Ethel Shaw, was at court to comfort her.
The appeal was supposed to be today. It's going to be no jury thing, so they understood that it was going to take 2 days, and it wasn't the case that you could just dismiss in an hour, so it's postponed to January.
It's now November, and the legal teams have seized this opportunity to get all parties to try and negotiate a settlement.
It appears as if this developer is going to offer a price that would be more realistic than the 400,000, because everybody knows that is ludicrous. And also, he was going to offer right of residence for a limited amount of time, which is also ludicrous because they want to get back till the day they die.
It's gone on so long, I mean, I just want it finished with, It's up to my two sister-in-laws, to compromise.
What progress has been made?
Oh, we've made quite a lot because they were adamant that they didn't want to move for 400,000. And that's a big step.
But just the day after negotiations by the legal teams, hopes of a settlement are beginning to fade. Rose and Eileen are not happy with the developer's new offer, which falls far short of the £2 million expected.
I don't want them to settle. I don't care if it makes us all bankrupt. I just don't want, this is, all this. Why should an enormous amount of money go to a property developer?
The situation seems to be that they want to live in the house until they die. The developer knows that. I don't object to them coming back in. Oh, not at all. I've told the courts this, my solicitor, my barrister, everybody. They can come back in, but where are they going to live in the house when the place is falling apart? So I am waiting on answers at the moment. So I expect my son and myself will be staying there anyway, in a freezing cold house, falling apart.
I'm not over interested in being a millionaire. Although I wouldn't turn it down now if it was right. But nevertheless, it's not the be-all and end-all of my existence. I think there's an awful lot more to life than that. And I certainly think it'd be much nicer for me to live where I want to live, instead of being forced to live where I don't want to live.
However, Rose's efforts have been to no avail. In June, the Dublin High Court finally ruled that the original contract was valid. Marino Park must be sold for £400,000.
What if there is no will at all? That's in the concluding episode of Battle of Wills next Thursday at 8 here on 4. Next tonight, why the North American Indane is on a collision course with environmentalists, the very ones who cultivated their stereotyped image as nature's guardian.